Hello, it is still Unfiltered Conversation on Cleveland TV, and remember that we exist to bridge the world in the tourism sector for the development of Africa. My name is Frank Kalidemiga, and today we'll be discussing freedom of American slavery from 1619 to 1865. And my guest is none other than Dr. Beach Malcolm. Dr. Malcolm is a U.S. publisher and entrepreneur and also the president African Diaspora Business Roundtable. You're welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, we're discussing the freedom of American slavery. All right, I'd like us to start with this. When you say American slavery, what do you have in mind? What does that really mean?
Well, in our history in America, talking about the African Americans, some people have said 1619 as the year that the first slaves came from Africa to America. It came over to work. I mean, that was the reason for starting slavery, because a new country like America needed some labor to actually develop the country and build things and grow things, in particular, in agriculture. And so slavery was started to give these colonists in America, an upper hand, an edge, and economically in terms of building their wealth in America. And slavery was the way they did that, because they did not have to pay the slaves. They barely had to feed and clothe them, and they lived in all kinds of shacks and other, uncomfortable situations on the plantation. So this started in 1619 in America, and it lasted all the way up to 1865. And what happened in 1861, there was a war that was started between the northern states of America and the southern states of America. The southern states declared themselves independent from the North, from the Union. The North was called the Union Army, the Union states. So in the South, that's predominantly where slavery existed. Okay, we had more slaves in the South than they had in the North, even though you still had a few in the North, but the whole economy of the South, with cotton in particular, the cotton trade with Europe, that was what was keeping the money flowing for the Southerners. And the North was running what we call the national government, which means they were collecting the taxes. And the South was making a lot of money, and the North said, we need more taxes. Well, the South at some point decided, in South Carolina, that was the name of the state in the South, that decided they weren't going to pay any more taxes. So they fired some cannons at the revenue collection station in Charleston, South Carolina, that was called Fort Sumter. So it really wasn't a military fort, it was a revenue collection fort. As the boats left Charleston Harbor to go out to the Atlantic, they had to pay a tax. And South Carolina said, we're not paying that tax anymore. And the same thing happened with some of the other states, southern states. They decided, we're not paying those taxes anymore. We're going to form our own government, our own country, and we call ourselves the Confederate States of America. So then you had the two different countries, really, in a war. They called it the Civil War, because both sides were Americans, but they decided to fight. This was in 1861. Now, in 1861, the North thought, when they started this war, they said, well, it's not going to last long. We'll just, take them out, get them back in line in a couple months. Well, it didn't work like that. And in 1862, the South was actually winning the war. The South was winning the war. And President Lincoln, he was president of the North at that time, he panicked and said, I got to do something strategically, come up with a military strategy to turn this thing around. And he issued something that everybody is familiar with called the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, the Emancipation Proclamation declared that all slaves were free in those states that were in rebellion against the Union. That was a clause in it. So Lincoln was president of the North, but he wasn't president of the South. So by him making that statement of emancipation didn't mean anything because the slaves were in the South and he had power over the North. So the Confederates just said, well, we're not going to worry about that. So it didn't really free the slaves, is what I'm saying. But what it did, it had a clause in the Emancipation Proclamation that allowed these ex-slaves to join the Union Armed Forces for the first time. Over 200,000 of these men enlisted in the Union Armed Forces. And I'm talking about the Navy, the artillery, the cavalry, and the infantry. And then all of a sudden you find that after 1863, the North started to win more battles and eventually won the war. And that's the point that we try to make, that the war ended for all the American slaves on June the 19th. And that's why that's one of the biggest holidays in African-American history. It's called Freedom Day, June the 19th. And that's the day that we're celebrating today, the day the slaves were freed. But the important message to most people is that the slaves freed themselves. These 200,000 ex-slaves won the war for the North and really saved the North, saved the Union, because otherwise the Confederacy would have won, and who knows, we may still be in slavery today. So that's what we're celebrating on June the 19th. It's called Freedom Day.
Wow. All right, I would like to ask this question. Over 200,000 slaves, all right, that is the war between the northern states and then the southern slaves. When you say the northern states and then the northern slaves and then the southern slaves, was there a difference between these two sets of people?
Well, I mean, the northern part of America, that was the North, and then the southern part, all the way down to Texas, that was the South. Okay, so what are you asking me about that?
Yeah, I'm just asking the standard of living, all right, before during the slave, all right,
Yes,
and now.
yes.
Could you explain, was it different from when they were slaves then, all right?
Yeah.
Or this was, were they able to have that freedom they desired really in America?
Well, a couple things happened. After the war was over, the North had a plan to send the slaves back to Africa, those that wanted to go. And some of them went, not too many, but some of them went to Liberia in Africa. So they actually went back to Africa. But most of them stayed in the United States. And in fact, most of them actually stayed in the South. Even though they were free, they had nowhere else to go. They had no money. So there was a system developed called sharecropping, where the slaves were supposed to get a percentage of the crops that they planted and harvest for the landowner, because the landowner was still the plantation owner. You know, even though the South lost the war, they kept the land. You know, there was supposed to be a program called 40 acres and a mule for each slave family that was freed. But like a lot of things happen in politics, they changed their minds later after the war was over. So even though you were free, you had nowhere to go and you had no money. So people tried this sharecropping idea, which means that they would get a percentage of the profits from the harvest. Okay. But like a lot of things, they needed some supplies from the company store is what they called it. Each one of these big plantations had a company store that sold goods and clothing. And so the slaves, the ex-slaves, would go to the market, go to this company store and buy what they needed. And then when the profits came from the harvest, they had to pay off what they got from the store, and then they would have what was left. And a lot of times there was nothing left, which means that they were still in the same position they were in before with no money after having done all the work. And so the sharecropping idea did not work too well too long. And there was something also after the war called Reconstruction. Reconstruction in the South meant that these ex-slaves now had a right to vote. This is something we all take for granted, but now they had a right to vote after the war. And a lot of them voted for Black candidates, Black politicians. So right after the war, we had some Black congressmen and senators from the South going to Washington, D.C. to make the laws. Well, the white folks in the South hated that. I mean, they really did. And eventually what they did was they changed the voting laws to say that you couldn't register to vote unless you had a relative that was already registered to vote. They said you couldn't register to vote unless you could read the Constitution of the United States by heart, verbatim, without any paper. They came up with all these kinds of rules. They call them Jim Crow laws that were disenfranchising the new Black population. So eventually it became a matter of you couldn't vote. So we didn't get as many people in Congress anymore. It's almost like, as they always do, they changed the rules on us, So even though they did that, still a lot of slaves stayed in the South because they had nowhere to go in the North. Some of them went north, but still the same problem existed in trying to find jobs, and get a place to work. And that was very difficult for most of them.
All right, let's look at present day. Are you saying that they've not been fully integrated into the American society?
Absolutely. I mean, we still have so many. Well, let's talk about it this way. It's hard to get integrated if you don't have money. You can't start a business if you don't have money. You can't buy a house if you don't have money. You can't send your kids to college if you don't have money. So money becomes a crucial issue here. So many Black families, they struggled, to try to save the money. And also during this time, right after, I can tell you, Reconstruction, there was something called segregation. There was a segregation between the whites and the Blacks, meaning that the Black people could not go to the white stores. The Black people could not get management jobs in the corporations, okay? A lot of times they couldn't get any jobs in the corporations. So there was this problem of how do you expand? Well, for businesses, there were Black businesses now, okay? Because Black folks are very industrious. They figure stuff out, try to figure out how to solve problems. And the solution to their problem was to develop their own businesses and for the Black community to start buying from these businesses and keeping the money rotating in their own community, okay? And this allows some Black businesses to actually start banks, start insurance companies, begin to build their own schools, okay, and their own hospitals. So the Black community became very, very self-contained during segregation. And then somebody had the bright idea to say, well, we're going to integrate. We're going to have integration, in America. And what did integration do? Well, the integration meant that now the Black community could buy goods and services from the white community. And they did, unfortunately. And a lot of the businesses in the Black community closed because they didn't have any more customers. Everybody went to buy, their goods and services from the white businesses. And the white businesses did well. Then we had a situation, something called affirmative action. Okay, that means they open up some of the jobs and the management positions to more Black entrepreneurs, men and women. So what did that do? That meant that the people that would normally be the business leaders in the community, they were industrious, smart, and they understood money. Well, now they went to work for the white businesses because now they opened the doors to that. And we have fewer and fewer Black businesses. So we got fewer Black businesses now than we had, back during the days of segregation. So everybody is trying to figure, well, what comes next? We don't know in terms of saving the Black community. The only thing that's next, let me tell you, the only thing that's next is Africa. We got to connect with Africa. And then I think the African Americans will have a better day.
All right. I would like to ask you talked about integration into the American society. All right. So wouldn't that
Yes.
make a difference in the life of these slaves, being that they will be integrated into the American society? Was there need for them to have sought their own, should I say, confederation now? Or
Well, I'm saying that before integration, during segregation, all of them had to live in one part of town. They couldn't live anywhere they wanted to, no matter how much money they had. They were not allowed to live in certain parts of the town. So they all lived in their part of the town, the Black part of town. And when you live somewhere, you need goods and services. You need stores to buy your food from. You need movie theaters to go out for entertainment, nightclubs. You had your own community. And every time you moved the dollars around, that kept the community solid because that's the way economics work. You got to keep spending the money in your own community and everybody benefits. That $1 keeps turning over and turning over. Back in those days, $1 would stay in the Black community for, a month and a half, maybe even 2 months. But now it stays in our community 6 hours, okay, before it's gone to pay some white man for something else. And that does not help your own individual growth, your own economy. If the money that you are making, you're constantly giving it to somebody else that never gives it back to you. I mean, integration would have been fine if the white people had spent money with Black businesses, but they didn't do that. They kept all the money they were making before and the new Black consumer dollars too. So the white folks did fine and the Black businesses started to deteriorate.
all right, now let's take a look at the freedom of the American slaves. All right, you talked about coming back to Africa. All right,
Yes.
starting off what they've gained over there and order. What is the plan for this real freedom that you talk about?
Well, I'm saying that people have to realize on both sides of the ocean, the African Americans are not doing well, even though it looks like it on television. You see all these rich sports people and, these big folks that got these great jobs and stuff. But there's the wealth, the basic wealth of the African American community is not going up, it's going down. When you talk about everybody, okay? So Africa on the same basis is that you're exploding with population, but you don't have all of the resources you need to develop the continent. You've got all the minerals, but you don't have the technical resources. You don't have the manufacturing capabilities, and a lot of the trading venues. Even in agribusiness, you have something called post-harvest losses. The farmer spent all his time harvesting all the food, but he loses half of it before he can get it to the market. So that's just money lost, Whereas we're saying that these African Americans, they've got skills. They know they have enough knowledge to take care of those problems. They have enough knowledge to build manufacturing companies because that's what they're doing now in America. They're building their own manufacturing companies. You got some African Americans that make car parts for Detroit. Every kind of car seat, car door, car windshield. You have Black manufacturers, Black owned manufacturers. Businesses are owned by Black people that are doing this manufacturing of these parts. Well, they could do the same thing in Africa. Do you see what I'm saying? And a lot of times in America, the businesses, I mean, we got a lot of strong, good, smart businesses in America trying to get contracts with both the private sector and the government. And we always begging, please give us 10% of the contracts or something, anything. And we're not getting it. It's a struggle and a fight because they have something called a minority program. A minority program means that white women, okay, gay people, okay, Latinos, okay, Asians, and then finally black people have to go after the small piece of set-asides that have been set in terms of contracts that these businesses and the government do, okay? And we're not getting our fair share. You know, we're over 15% of the population, but we get less than 5% of the business from the government, okay? We can't survive like that. We're not going to get any stronger. I can tell you, money is the root of all things. We don't make enough money. We can't build any homes, can't send our kids to college. We're not growing economically. Just a few of us are doing very well. You know, you see that in Africa a lot of times. There are more African millionaires than there are Black American millionaires. Let's make no mistake about that. Same thing with billionaires. It's just that the American Black millionaires and billionaires on television, but Africa's got more of them. But I'm saying Africa's got 1.3, 1.5 billion people, whereas in America, we got 45 million, okay? But if we could work together, you know, we could do something to increase the gross national product. The gross national product of all of Africa is 1.5 trillion. Well, these African Americans at 45 million, our gross national product is 1.5 trillion, you know? So the money, you know, is incredible in terms of comparable. If we could begin to work together and trade, we could all make more money if we could begin to work together.
But you're obviously one of the convenient advocating for this migration to Africa. So how do you think this migration would benefit both the slaves coming back home and in the African continent?
Well, I mean, there's two parts to what you're saying, and we gotta always remember that a lot of people have problems with the word migration, you know, because they make it sound like a whole bunch of people are getting ready to move over into your neighborhood, you know, and you don't want that. Why they coming over in my neighborhood? You know, there's always a problem with that. Another part of what we're talking about is trade, foreign direct investment, and trade between the diaspora in America and the Africans in Africa. If we begin to trade with each other, then we both will grow. In a business deal, let me tell you something. In a business deal, both parties make money. That's the whole purpose of a business deal. You know, if I'm doing trading with you, that's because I'm gonna make some money out of the trade. You trading with me, you say, well, I'm gonna get the deal, get the price right, and I'm gonna make some money out of the trade from in Africa. So both parties can make money if we trade together, and we both will get wealthy. You know, migration is somebody coming to your country to start their own new life. They're looking for a job. They may want to start a business. And some people feel that's going to take away from you. Well, not really. You know, a lot of people that when they come migration, they're bringing skills. They're bringing talents. And a lot of times they're bringing money, especially when you talk about Americans. A lot of Americans now are retiring. They reach the retirement age, which means they get a nice little monthly check from their job and from the government with Social Security. They're bringing that money to Africa. They're not looking for another job. They want to sit on the beach, you know, they want to watch the sunrise. So this could be another way of looking at migration, to say you got some retirees coming back to Africa, their homeland. A lot of people feel that in the diaspora feel better when they come to Africa. They feel they get treated better. They feel like they're coming home, you know, and not in some foreign country like, you know, like I said, in America. You can't get treated any worse than you get treated in America. Like I said, slavery, That's rough. You know, if you get as bad as slavery was, I mean, it's nothing like that in Africa. I know a lot of people in Africa feel, well, colonialism was terrible when the European colonists came up. Yeah, that was something, but you don't, slavery, my goodness, slavery was rough. And so being able to come home to Africa is something that a lot of people are looking forward to now as they get ready for retirement. And that could be a big boost to the economy of Africa. If you think about the diaspora retiring, bringing that money to Africa, you know, it make a big deal. More jobs for Africans and more of a lot of things, more businesses, you know.
And as they will say, there's no place like
Yeah,
home.
absolutely. That's right. That's right.
Right. Let's get to hear from you a message, all right, for the Africans, and at the same time a message for the American slavery celebrating their freedom today.
Yes. Well, you know, there's a couple things. One, we need to understand that, you know, slavery started and it stopped. Okay. Didn't last forever. 1619 to 1865. But I said the most important message out of that is that the slaves freed themselves. That's why I'm dressed up in my uniform. This is a colonel's uniform. I'm what you call a reenactor. In other words, a historian, a group that we reenact these battles. You know, we go, you know, let me show you my gun here. See? This is my
Wow.
gun here. I go out and we march and we shoot. I mean, this particular weapon here only shoots one bullet at a time. So after each shot, I had to reload the weapon here and put another bullet down there, put the gunpowder in there, and then I could shoot again. You know, and that is something that that was tough going. But as reenactors, we reenacted the battles in the Civil War. My uniform, the reenactor that I'm portraying, was a lieutenant colonel named William Reed, and he was the commander of the 35th United States Colored Troops Infantry. Okay, there were very few officers in the U.S. Colored Troops. Most of the officers were white, but there were a few black officers. And the guy that I'm portraying, reenacting for, he was one of those officers that led his regiment. Generally, the regiment had about 1,000 men in it. Okay, so it was a big job, but that's what you had to have to win a battle. You had to have a lot of men and a lot of guns. You know.
All right, that was supposed to be my last question, but I can't just leave you without asking this question. You just demonstrated something, and I discovered that I didn't ask the program. All right, when you celebrate the day, what is the program like? What do you do on that day? You actually explain one or two things about it, but let's get
Yeah, well, no,
the real picture.
when people celebrate, it's like any place else you celebrate. You have a big party. We have people that are singing, dancing, playing the drums, you know,
Wow.
and eating. You know, we got a festival, so we got to have food and stuff to eat. We have vendors selling jewelry, African jewelry, and a lot of different things. A lot of people are connecting to their roots in Africa. They're acknowledging the fact that they're Africans. And they're free Africans. This was our Freedom Day. The day that we got freedom in America that we celebrated is Juneteenth, June the 19th, from 1865.
Is it celebrated now in America?
Yeah, we're celebrating today. We celebrated the whole weekend. You know, we celebrated yesterday and the day before. Some people celebrating the whole week, you know, the week before, you know, and so it's growing. And it's like if people are just realizing, wait a minute, Freedom Day. This is the biggest. Before the Civil War, there were 4 million Africans enslaved in America. 4 million. After the Civil War, there was zero. Okay, so this is a big, big deal for 4 million slaves to be freed on that day. That's the day that we celebrate our freedom.
The celebration continues next year, June 19th.
Yeah, every year. It's a national holiday in America. All the workers get off work, all the federal government gets off, the banks close. You know, it's a big deal. It's a really big deal. And a lot of people don't know
That's quite,
that. And that's why I'm here dressed up like this. You and I will sharing the
yeah.
information to the rest of Africa, let them know what's going on.
Wow. That's interesting, Dr. Malcolm Bridges, being over a 30 minutes interview, having you to explain what it means to have a freedom of American slavery. Thank you so much for having the time to come on the show and explain it
Thank
to
you.
us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, viewers, that's a package for today. Until next edition, I remain Frank Media. Do have a blessed day.